All right, strap in, everybody, because this deep dive, well, this one's going to get a little unsettling. We're going through this U.S. House of Representatives report. It's called the Censorship Industrial Complex. And let me tell you, it brings up some really serious concerns. Concerns about the government maybe overreaching, maybe even violating the First Amendment. So,
Yeah, this report, it's a bombshell. It's directly alleging that high-ranking officials in the Biden administration, they were putting pressure on, these big tech giants, Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, all those, to censor content that they just didn't like, that didn't fit their narrative. So,
and we're not just talking about, theories or speculation here. This report, it's built on hard evidence. We're talking internal documents, communications directly from these companies. And it paints a pretty clear picture, a picture of pressure and compliance. It's almost like we're getting this behind-the-scenes look at how the government might be pulling strings, shaping what we see online, what we even hear online.
exactly. And the report, it's very direct. It alleges that the White House, they specifically targeted content about COVID-19, the 2020 election, two topics that are incredibly sensitive, and where, well, controlling information could have some huge political consequences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was the reaction of Nick Clegg. He's the president's global affairs over at Meta. Apparently, according to this report, he had a call with a senior Biden advisor. And Clegg, he was outraged by the White House's demands, these demands to remove certain content. It's even said that he compared their tactics, what the White House was doing, to the Chinese government's approach to censorship.
Wow. That's a pretty serious comparison to make. And it really highlights just how serious these allegations are, We're talking about the First Amendment here, the bedrock of American democracy. And any attempt by the government to go around it, well, that should be setting off alarm bells everywhere.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It should be. So let's dive into the specifics here, all right? The report, it lays out this timeline of events. It shows how the content moderation policies at these companies, they shifted. And they shifted in lockstep with pressure from the Biden administration. It's almost like a roadmap of how this censorship might have been implemented.
Yeah, and you see some really interesting things in this timeline. For example, you have content that questions the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines, their effectiveness, or content promoting the lab leak theory. And it seems like that content just vanished from platforms like Facebook and YouTube. And it vanished right after the White House started applying pressure.
Yeah, it's hard to see that as just a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
And it really makes you question the motives of these tech companies. Like, were they actually forced into this, or did they go along willingly with the White House? And if they did go along willingly, then why? What was the motivation there?
That's where it gets really fascinating, I think, because we have to start thinking about ulterior motives here. I mean, remember, these are massive companies, multi-billion-dollar corporations. They have a lot to lose. They don't want to antagonize the government, the same government that controls regulations. That could really hurt their bottom line.
So are you saying that they might have seen cooperating, quote unquote, as just the easiest way out, the path of least resistance?
It's possible, right. But then you also have to consider the public relations nightmare.
Oh, right. I mean, if they publicly defy the White House, that's going to make them a target. Nobody wants to be seen as the enemy, especially when they're already under scrutiny for all this other stuff, the misinformation, the privacy concerns, all that.
Exactly. And that's where this report gets really interesting, because it starts to show these inconsistencies between what these companies were saying publicly and what we see in these internal communications.
Like, for example, Facebook. Initially, they completely denied that the White House was influencing their policies at all. But when you read these internal emails, it's a completely different story.
Right.
You see these executives, they're clearly worried about the pressure from the administration. They're even talking about potential retaliation if they don't play ball. It's kind of scary, actually.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, what were they really thinking during all of this? Were they just protecting themselves, or was there something more going on? Something maybe even a little shady?
Yeah, it really makes you think, are we seeing a pattern here? These companies, they say one thing publicly, but then behind the scenes, it's a totally different story. It seems like they're willing to, to compromise what they say they stand for, all for the sake of money and politics.
Yeah, and it raises a really big question, what was driving these executives? Were they really afraid of the Biden administration? Were they just looking out for themselves? Or maybe they even agreed with what the administration was trying to do, even if it meant, bending the rules a bit.
So basically maybe a mix of fear, greed, and ideology, all rolled into one.
Could be, and that's a dangerous combination. because it creates the situation where a few powerful people, powerful institutions, they can basically control what information we see. They can shape how the public thinks about things, and they don't have to answer to anyone.
Okay, so let's talk more about these motives then. If these executives were truly afraid of the Biden administration, what exactly were they afraid of? What could the White House have actually done to them if they didn't go along with the censorship?
Well, the government has a lot of power over these tech companies. They control the regulations, antitrust laws, all sorts of things. Plus, they award these lucrative government contracts. So if a company defied the White House, they could be putting all of that at risk.
So basically, they could have been worried about losing billions of dollars or even facing lawsuits if they didn't play ball.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
And that kind of pressure, I mean, that's got to be tough to stand up to, especially for these publicly traded companies.
Right. I mean, they have to answer to their shareholders, and shareholders, they just want to see profits.
Okay, but what about the personal beliefs of these executives? Is it possible that some of them actually agreed with what the administration was doing? Maybe they saw this censorship as, I don't know, as something necessary, even if it meant silencing some voices?
It's definitely possible. We know that Silicon Valley leans pretty heavily to the left, politically speaking.
Right.
So it's not crazy to think that some of these executives might have seen this as a way to promote their own worldview.
So we're talking about a mix of fear, greed, and ideology.
Exactly. And that's a recipe for trouble.
It really is. Now, the report goes into some really specific examples of this alleged censorship. And one that I found particularly disturbing was what they call the YouTube files.
Right.
It shows that the White House was putting pressure on YouTube to take down videos that didn't even violate the platform's own rules.
Wow.
It's like they were trying to control the narrative no matter what, even if it meant forcing YouTube to censor perfectly legitimate content.
It's like they were constantly moving the goalposts just to make sure they got the outcome they wanted.
And it wasn't just YouTube. The report also talks about how the White House targeted Amazon, the company we all use for online shopping.
Really? I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, apparently they weren't happy with some of the books that were being sold on Amazon, and they pressured Amazon to remove them.
That's interesting. Amazon has so much influence over book publishing. It makes sense that the White House would target them too.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to control the flow of information everywhere, not just on social media. It's a little scary when you think about it.
Yeah, it definitely raises some concerns about the future of free speech online.
Right. I mean, if the government can pressure these companies to censor content whenever they want, then what's to stop them from going even further?
That's the big question.
I think this report shows us that we can't just trust these tech companies when they say that they're all about free speech. The evidence suggests that they're willing to cave to pressure, especially when it's coming from the government.
Yeah, I mean, they're businesses at the end of the day, and sometimes doing the right thing and protecting free speech, well, that might not be the most profitable option.
Unfortunately, you're right. So it seems like we've got these tech giants caught in the middle. Pressure from the government, worries about their profits, and some executives maybe even agreeing with the censorship. It's like, I don't know, a recipe for disaster for free speech online.
It really is a troubling situation, and it all comes down to power, right? The immense power these tech companies have and the government's willingness to use that power to control the narrative.
And then there's the effect on everyday users, like us. If we know that our post could be taken down, our account suspended, just for saying something that someone doesn't like, well, it's going to make us think twice before speaking our minds.
Absolutely. It creates this culture of self-censorship where we're all constantly second-guessing ourselves, afraid to say anything that might be seen as controversial, even if it's completely legitimate.
It's almost like a digital version of Big Brother, The government and these tech companies watching our every move online, deciding what we can and can't say.
And that's something that should worry everyone, no matter what your political beliefs are. When we lose the ability to speak freely, to have open and honest debates, well, we lose a fundamental part of what makes a democracy work.
This report, it's a serious wake-up call. It shows that the threat to free speech online is real, and it's coming from multiple directions.
Right, we can't afford to ignore this.
We need to start demanding more transparency from these companies, more accountability from the government.
Exactly. We need stronger legal protections for online speech. We need to hold these companies responsible for the decisions they make about what content to allow and what to censor.
But it's not just about laws and regulations, right? It's also about changing the culture online.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to encourage tolerance, open-mindedness. We need to create a space where people feel comfortable expressing different viewpoints without being afraid of being attacked or silenced.
Yeah, we need to move away from this cancel culture mentality. We need to understand that disagreement and debate are healthy. They're essential for a democracy to function.
So what can we do, as individuals, I mean?
Mhm.
It's easy to feel powerless against these giant corporations and the government.
I know what you mean.
But we're not powerless, right?
Absolutely not. We have a voice, and we need to use it.
How, though? What can we actually do?
Well, we need to speak out against censorship whenever we see it.
Right.
We need to support organizations that are fighting for digital rights, for free expression, and we need to be more careful about the information we consume online.
What do you mean?
I mean, we need to think critically about what we see online.
Okay.
We need to seek out diverse perspectives, not just stay in our own echo chambers.
We can't just passively accept the information we're given. We need to be active, we need to demand transparency, hold those in power accountable, and create a space for open and respectful dialogue.
That's exactly right. The future of free speech online depends on it.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive, a journey into a world that's, well, a little unsettling to say the least. But it's also been a reminder that we have power. We can make a difference by staying informed, by speaking out against injustice, and by supporting those who are fighting for our digital rights. We can help make sure that the internet remains a force for good, a place where everyone can speak freely, and a tool for building a better world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.